Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's episode, what I have for you is our companion to the podcast. As you all know, I'm going through the High Arcana, and today's kind of fun because we are looking at the 8th card of the tarot. And we can't look at the 8th card without looking at the 11th card. So some of you know this. There is a bit of an argument in the esoteric fields around what should go where and why. Now, originally, the 8th card was Justice. Most of our decks that we see have the 8th card as Strength. Why is this? Well, the Golden Dawn moved it. The Golden Dawn wanted to align the tarot much more closely with the astrology and the houses, and they have all kinds of layers of correspondence in their tarot deck. So they move Justice from the 8th position to the 11th position so that it would correspond with the 11th house of the astrology much better, and all of the themes around that. And then they put the 11th card, Strength, in the 8th position. Most of our decks are based on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And that deck took the Hermetic teachings of the Golden Dawn and expanded on it. The Golden Dawn deck that was around for quite some time before the Rider-Waite was not openly published, although the Golden Dawn used it. Part of their teachings was that every single person in the order would pen their own deck. They would copy the drawings and color them all in, and that was part of their teaching process. So that is why most of our contemporary decks, because they are drawing off the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, they have that Justice card in the 11th position and the Strength card in the 8th. The only other esoteric deck that is used a lot in magical circles that has the original placement of these cards is the Thoth deck by Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley's style of occultism really does separate from the Golden Dawn. Like, he left and started his own stuff and has done his own stuff. So even though he was originally taught with that order. Sorry, guys, this is like Occultism 101. If you didn't know, now you do. So we're going to look at those two decks. And we're also going to just look at a couple other decks that I have that, because why not? Right? So it's interesting to note anytime you are studying a deck, which decks put those cards where. So you can know the kind of magical background of the authors of your tarot decks just by looking at those two cards. So the podcast goes into a little bit more, a little bit less, as always. There's different information there. So please, if this interests you, go over to the podcast and have a listen. Join our Earbud Coven by subscribing to that. So let's look at these cards. Now, I do have a Golden Dawn deck, so I'm just going to hold them up today. So here is their Strength card. And it has a lot of what we've come to know the Strength card for. We have the Lion. We have the Lady. We have the Lady having power over the Lion. The Rider-Smith deck shows a chain of daisies between the two. This deck just has very understated woman controlling a lion. Now let's look at Aleister Crowley's deck. I don't actually have a Aleister Crowley deck here, so I'm going to use the internet. So if you look at this one, a lot different. You can see that Crowley had different ideas of feminine power than the Hermetic order did. Aleister Crowley did play around with sex magic and chaos magic. And you can see that when he is depicting feminine power, he is showing her in ecstasy and has kind of that idea of the power of creation as she's reaching through the crust of Gaia up to source. So this card talks a lot more about creative strength and creativity and kind of that drum that beats inside us all. Both cards talk about inner strength. They talk about empowerment. They talk about that spark, that fire of the soul within us all, the kind of leadership that has people be drawn to you. It is interesting to note that the card does correspond to Leo. because there's a lion in it. Now I brought two other decks out just to kind of be fun. So you guys know I love the Legacy of the Divine Tarot. So when you look at this Strength card, it is in the 8th position. But if you notice, it has a lot more sensualism than a traditional card. So I like it because it does kind of marry both ideas. We've got that beautiful woman and not just a lion. We have other cats that are associated with female prowess. We have a cheetah and a tigress as well. And then from the Secret Forest Tarot, our fairy, instead of having power over a lion, she has power over this crazy beetle. And I find it interesting because she seems to be overcoming it instead of ruling it with her heart. Now, onto that Justice card. So when we look at the Justice card from the Golden Dawn, we have very traditional symbolism. We have the pillars we've talked about over and over. We have this Egyptian headdress that brings to mind a lot of the Hermetic and kind of Greek and Roman overlays that the Golden Dawn and the Hermetic order have. There's a lot of Kabbalistic beliefs in there and like old school Alexandrian beliefs. I did find it interesting that the Justice card is sitting on a dog and that Anubis is the Egyptian god of the underworld and the opening of the way. I find that kind of neato. Yeah. And then we have the typical symbols of the scales of justice and the sword. Now the Crowley deck, pretty cool, hey? A lot of geometry in here. Throughout the whole deck, there is a ton of sacred geometry. You can see justice in here. It is a traditional Lady Justice with the blindfold, where the Golden Dawn doesn't have the blindfold. And most of our Greek and Roman goddesses of justice, like Themis, she is blindfolded. Now, the Egyptian goddess Mat, she is not blindfolded when she weighs your heart. She can see when your heart is weighed against a feather on the scales at the end of your life, kind of thing, which I think this is more kind of talking about. So anyway, the Crowley one, it's really beautiful. I find that a lot of the symbolism is also in the coloring. He chose those steely colors, those gray colors, really connecting it to the element of air and that sign of Libra that it stands for. And do note that just like the Strength card is renamed Lust, this card is renamed Adjustment. Kind of neat, hey? Because he adjusted it back to where it was and re-brought order to the deck, in his opinion. Now, we've got a couple other cards. Again, the Chiromanchetti, the Greek goddesses. We have got residing over the scales. They are right inside the scales, very similar to Crowley's drawing, how justice is inside the scale, not holding it, but the actual scale itself. I really like the way that the Legacy of the Divine kind of echoes to the Crowley deck a bit without changing their position. I do find that interesting. And we have the Secret Forest Tarot. So the scales, again, we've got balance. She's holding the scales. She's holding the sword. We have kind of that idea of scales within the plant life there. We have that kind of balance idea. What I do like is how this really does echo, the symbology echoes the divine feminine, right? It almost looks like a uterus and ovaries, doesn't it? So we're talking again about feminine wisdom, feminine power, and Lady Justice, and truth, and the idea of truth. So there you go, 4 different decks, 8 different cards. And there's a lot of history. If you want to dive into it, there's a whole bunch of history around this kind of rift that formed in the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley leaving it. It's some pretty cool esoteric history. You can just Google your little heart out on it. And yeah, I hope this helped you. I hope this informs you as a reader and helps you grow. Okay, take care, bye.